Okay, I think we'll probably go ahead and get started. Thanks to everyone who's joined, and I'm assuming we'll get some more people streaming in here. But like I said just a few minutes ago, we do have a really full program, so I want to make sure that we don't get shortchanged on time here. So, welcome to Solar Storage and Electrification, a Perfect Match, number 2. This is a slight follow-up to a program that we held in November of last year, where we're talking about just what you see here: solar storage and electrification. Electrification is a huge topic right now. We want to see people getting more efficient, looking at fuel switching in their homes, and generating the fuel that they're using in their home by adopting solar electric systems. So really great marriage of a bunch of different types of technology here, and we're going to go through all of that. But before we do that, we're going to give you some introductions. My name is Elliot Whitehurst. I've been with what was previously known as the Energy and Sustainability Division at Sonoma County. Now we are known as the Climate Action and Resiliency Division, after joining with some of our colleagues that operate in the same space within the county here. So I've been here for about 7.5 years, a little bit over that. Prior to coming to work here, I did spend just about 10 years in the solar industry working for a contractor. And I tend to do a lot of the stuff dealing with solar here at the county. I also manage what's known as a local government partnership with Pacific Gas and Electric Company, where we try and help municipal and K through 12 facilities, special districts make energy efficiency improvements to their facilities, amongst other things. We all wear a lot of different hats here at the county. On this meeting as well is my colleague Danielle. If you want to bring yourself off of, put yourself up on the camera and give a brief introduction for yourself, if you don't mind.
Hi, I'm Danielle Poole. I also work with the division, and I'm here to moderate today. So if you have any questions as Elliot is talking and presenting, please just type them into the chat, and then I will relay those to him after the presentation has concluded.
Thanks, Danielle. And yeah, just so everyone knows, after we're done here, this is being recorded, and we're going to share a link for people to come back and go back through the video if you so choose. And as Danielle mentioned, we're going to try and save a little bit of time at the end of the program for some Q&A, but this is a really full program, so we'll just see where we get. And try and save some time. For those that may have attended the previous program in November, do be aware this is largely the same. However, we're going to talk a little bit more about net energy metering as it pertains to solar electric systems than we did last time, because we've got some better, more concrete understanding of what's happening in that realm. So we will get to that, and that's going to be a little bit more robust than it was last time. So before we get into that, though, we kind of like to talk a little bit about what it is that makes our division what it is. Within climate action and resiliency, our interest is in the community, in the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And so we offer a number of different services that face the community. Not a lot of people know about this division, and so we always like to take an opportunity to mention the things that we do. We've been in place since 2006 as the Energy and Sustainability Division, as I mentioned before. And we have a bunch of different programs that are facing the community. So we do facilitate site visits and building audits on the commercial and municipal level. We do house the Green Business Certification Program here for Sonoma County. We hold sustainability workshops, as much as we're doing right now. We maintain a qualified contractor list for our financing program. As you'll see there, financing and rebates. We have a financing program that's been in place since 2009, known as the Sonoma County Energy Independence Program, available to homeowners and to business owners. We hold specialized trainings for the public, for contractors, for a number of different market sectors within our community. And we also do consulting and project planning. If we get through this and you're interested in looking at your own site on a little bit more of a micro level, as opposed to the macro level we're looking at here, we can work with you one-on-one. to talk about potential projects, loading order, and talk about solar, how it may affect you, system sizing, pricing, all that sort of stuff. And that is a free service. Most of these are, as we're really here just facing the community and trying to help out however we can. So the main program here, the electric home, the all-electric home, so many possibilities. This is just kind of a quick breakdown of the different things that you might be looking at and considering when electrifying your home. Most of us have gas service, and the idea of electrification is very, very popular right now. Lots of rebates, lots of incentives, financing available, and we're going to talk about all of that. But, this process involves looking at the things that are consuming gas in your home or propane if you live a little bit more rurally, and porting those over to electricity, to fuel switching, and lots of potential. So as we look at this, we need to set some ground rules. Obviously, if you're going to be electrifying, if you're pulling usage away from gas or propane, that's going to equal higher usage in terms of electricity. So that's more kilowatt hours used in your home. Electrifying is going to obviously shift that cost from your gas bill to your electric bill. And there are rates that are available to homes and businesses that are using, that are qualified as all electric. And that is based on how you are heating your home. So if you're heating your home using gas, then you are subject to the standard traditional electric rates. If you are heating your home using electricity, then you can switch over to an all electric rate, which would basically allows you for more kilowatt hours at the lower price, at the baseline price. Be aware that natural gas is not a type of fuel that you can generate yourself, while electricity is, and that's why we're having this conversation, looking at electrifying and then producing that electricity with a renewable energy system. One of the big challenges in looking at electrification is that there's no real direct conversion from therms, which is the unit of billing for gas, to kilowatt hours, which is the unit of billing for electricity. You can, there are calculations. If you typed in Google, therms to kWh, you would find calculators. And so technically there is an actual, conversion calculation that you can run. But when you're talking about switching out appliances in your home, those have different efficiencies. And so the conversion doesn't translate perfectly. So there are some real challenges in looking at electrifying your home and setting a solid expectation for what that means for your usage going from gas to electricity. One thing to be aware of is that gas rates in PG&E's territory have been going up faster than electricity rates over the past few years. So, electrification, fuel switching is a big part of the conversation on the efficiency landscape right now, and that's only going to increase in terms of the frequency that you're hearing about it and talking about it. So when we're talking about the big things to consider in your home, the two biggest users of gas in most people's homes would be their furnace and their water heater. Traditionally, heating with gas, a gas furnace has a very, set design. For most of us, we're looking at package units in our home that are going to be ducted with an air handler. But heating and cooling with an electric heat pump can show some real added efficiencies. There are what are known as mini splits, heat pump mini split systems, which require no ducting. You see that here with heads that are installed in the home. They do have to go on an exterior wall for the venting and for the heat exchange to work properly. But it requires no ducting. We installed a system like this in my home, which was built in 1950. And so we didn't have ducts to begin with. This was a really great answer. And heat pumps actually do heating and cooling. So now we have the function to heat and cool our home, which is really nice. There are also ducted systems. You can replace your gas furnace with a heat pump system that is ducted and utilizes your existing ducts. It may trigger some inspections in terms of the efficiency of the ductwork itself if you're using existing ducts, but it is entirely possible and entirely feasible. Looking at these mini split systems, As I mentioned, they can heat and cool through a single system, which is really, really nice for those of us that really only had heating to begin with. And we've definitely been seeing some hotter summers. So having that cooling function has been really, really nice. Mini splits tend to be quieter than a standard furnace and AC systems. They do tend to have lower energy costs because they have a higher efficiency rating. With mini splits in particular, there's no duct loss. You don't have to worry about the air being conditioned and then losing some of those conditioned properties as it's delivered through a ducting system. It's just delivered right at the source. So that's a nice advantage. Beyond that, there are definitely more advantages to these systems, but one of the biggest difficulties, kind of like I was saying earlier, when we are looking to convert gas to electricity, this is the area where it's absolutely the hardest to make a real prediction as to what you'll see in terms of added kilowatt hour usage. So we're going to be running some models. I've got some models to share with you that make some assumptions on, this is the standard home, standard electricity usage and the standard bills, and this is what it looks like to couple a renewable energy system with that. And we're going to make some assumptions about usage for some of these appliances that we're going to be looking at fuel switching for. But this one in particular is always going to be the hardest. If you engage a solar contractor or if you engage an HVAC contractor and you're talking about what is this going to mean in terms of my added electricity usage, it's going to be really, really hard to get down to that because there are other factors that come into play. If it is ducted, if it is a ducted system, then, are those ducts insulated properly? Are they air sealed properly? Whether or not it's a ducted system, the home itself, is it insulated properly and air sealed properly? And then beyond that, we all have different ways that we utilize these systems. I keep my set points pretty low for most people's comfort level in the wintertime and probably pretty high in the summertime, which means that I'm probably going to be using fewer kilowatt hours than most that adopt this type of technology. So, your own usage patterns really tend to affect the usage as well for obvious reasons. So that's just to say it's really difficult to model out exactly what your added usage will be when you're fuel switching for a heat pump. But we can make some assumptions, and we will make some assumptions when I start showing you those models. Heat pump water heaters are the other one that are, one of the biggest spaces for potential savings in fuel switching. One of our largest usages of gas, whether that's natural gas or propane. Again, we see that heat pump water heaters do tend to be more efficient than gas, and certainly more efficient than electric resistance. One of the biggest things that people think they'd like to do when they're looking at fuel switching. And people are very interested in on-demand water heating, and particularly for electricity. And just be aware that unfortunately, on-demand electric water heaters are very inefficient. Heating anything with electric resistance tends to be very fuel inefficient and ends up being much more costly than you would think. And that when I say that, I'm talking primarily about units that would actually be able to handle the volume that could allow you to take a shower or something along those lines. There are point of use electric water heaters that may be beneficial to you, but that's really when you're talking about one faucet in the home. Maybe you have one that sits under your sink in the bathroom or something along those lines. That type of resistance heating can be more efficient, but primarily at this point, when we're talking about heating water with electricity, you're going to be thinking about a heat pump water heater. And there are tons of incentives to be doing this right now, just as I mentioned earlier, and we'll be looking at that as well. Some of the features and some of the benefits listed out here. In order to take advantage of those rebates, for those of you sitting in the Advanced Energy Center, you can pop out there, you can take a look at some of these units, and you can talk about incentives that are being offered for these. It's going to require that you take advantage of and agree to participate in a demand response program, wherein the utility has some has some control over the functionality of that system, which will add to grid stability. So in adopting this type of technology, you can be helping out with grid stability, which is a really nice move that we can all make. The grid itself is pretty, it's in need of help, and this is one space that we can help out. And there are credits to be earned in taking advantage of that demand response program as well. There are some potential benefits in terms of the byproducts of heat pump utilization, which is, as it states here, when a heat pump is running, it's expelling cold air. It can be captured to make the indoor space cooler in the summer as a bonus. So, with some smart design, you can actually use your heat pump water cooler almost as an AC unit for your home, which is kind of nice. And then, whenever we're talking about fuel switching for an appliance that sits in the home, even if it's in your garage, but especially if it's sitting, in a closet in your home, you're talking about combustion and off-gassing and emissions in your home. So taking this in as a new technology in your home, you can eliminate that source of combustion and eliminate a source of carbon monoxide, and that would greatly contribute to your indoor air quality, which is very important. So for heat pump water heaters, we have a better sense of, what that added usage looks like, because there was a study run by SMUD, which is much like our climate zone, definitely a little hotter in the summer, but it also gets colder in the winter in Sacramento. But their study showed that the average annual usage for a single heat pump water heater storage tank system is just shy of about 1,000 kilowatt hours per year. So when we run our model, we're going to use that. If you're considering installing one, know that it adds on about 1,000 kilowatt hours per year in our area. Furthermore, looking at different types of fuel switching and electrification, and especially talking about, indoor combustion and your ability to cut down on CO within your house, induction cooking is a very popular technology, much more popular outside of the US, in Europe and places where gas is a lot more expensive than it is for us. They've been utilizing induction cooking. And like I said, this is a really great way to potentially cut down on indoor combustion, improve your indoor air quality. And it does tend to be safer overall, of course, than having a lit fire in your home. And there is a surprising amount of control when cooking with induction cooking. You can boil water faster, and see that same level of control with gas that you get in terms of, quickly changing your cook temperature with the proper cookware. And really nice benefit is that it really does not add a whole lot of usage, a lot more than you would expect. In order to be listed as an Energy Star appliance, an induction cooktop needs to show under 125 kilowatt hours per year as its average usage. So lots of benefits to induction cooking, and I hope you'll consider it. I know that within the Advanced Energy Center there, you can actually rent out a single like countertop induction burner, and they'll give you something to cook with too, in terms of a pan if you don't have a ferrous metal pan, and you can take that home and try it out for yourself. And I think that you will probably be pretty pleasantly surprised in how reactive that type of cooking is. So check it out if you have the opportunity. Next is the consideration of heat pump clothing dryers. Not as common as all the rest of the heat pump technology. These are actually probably the newest of the heat pump appliances that you may be considering. But certainly they are very efficient, and they have a byproduct of water. They collect the water as the clothes are being heated and the moisture is being drawn out of them. So nice ability to take that water and water your plants after you wash some clothes. These do use a little more electricity than that induction cooktop that we were looking at, but definitely less than heating water. This shows in order to or per the American Council for Energy Efficient Economy, the average annual use for a heat pump dryer is about 400 kilowatt hours. Now, this one, that's going to be really dependent on how many people you have in the home, how many loads you're doing per month. But this is the average. So we assume that's probably for, like a family of 4. That's usually the case when we're talking about average usage for anything at all. So those are the 4 main areas where you'd be looking at electrification within your home. I mentioned incentives, of which there are quite a lot. This is a big block of text here, but just know that there are a lot of incentives coming online as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act that was signed by the White House last year. Those funds are set aside and they're allocated. However, every state is being given the autonomy to figure out how they want to administer those funds. So the responsibility falls on the state. These actual incentives will not be available quite yet, as the administration of them is still being formulated. But there are also tax credits as well as actual incentives. We will be getting the slide deck out, and you can watch back through this video to get a little bit more clear on what those are, if you'd like to revisit this stuff. I'm going to go through some other incentives, of which there are many. The Bay Area Regional Energy Network is offering incentives, as you can see here, for insulation and air sealing, along with making the change over to heat pump technologies for heating and cooling your home, for water heating, and for clothes drying and induction cooktop. So all of those technologies that we looked at, the Bay Area Regional Energy Network, or BayREN, is offering incentives, and these can all stack, including rebates that are coming from Sonoma Clean Power. As you can see here, again, heat pump technology, all of those things that we talked about, aside from the clothing dryer, I believe, are incentivized by Sonoma Clean Power. And these can all stack again. So some pretty robust rebates and incentives available. I've got some links to all these different incentives. And actually, I believe there are some additional incentives coming online as well that I did not include a link here for. So I will be sure to work that out and include it before this slide deck goes out. So lots of incentives, really exciting landscape for electrification right now. If you find yourself in a position where you're considering electrification, but you have like a brand new gas furnace, we would never advocate for adding anything to landfill. But if you are sitting on, failing equipment, or equipment that's beyond its useful life or its expected life, then that might be a good time to consider electrification. And there are a lot of incentives to help you do so. So onto electric vehicles. Obviously, I shouldn't say obvious. Obviously, most of us are considering electric vehicles for our next vehicles, as our cars do die, and much like the furnaces, as things die, they need to be replaced, obviously. And the vast majority of us have cars. That's just the way that we are set up to work in the US. So in California in particular, every new car sold by 2035 does have to be an electric vehicle. So most of us are going that direction. It's important to consider how that's going to affect our electricity usage, because as you can imagine, it does take a fair amount of electricity to move a car down the road. So a lot of people might be shocked at how much additional usage they'll see for an electric vehicle when it does come around to sizing a system for that. But when you consider the fact that you'll no longer be having to go to a gas station, and you are effectively prepaying for your fuel to move your vehicle for as long as a solar electric system may be functioning, there are some really great ways to not only take advantage of driving using electricity, but to offset those bills as well. So electric vehicles are still being incentivized. We expect high usage out of them, but we can really drill down on, how much electricity that's going to be using if you can get a good sense of how many miles you're going to be driving with that car. Even without a solar electric system at this point, there are, savings through using electricity as a fuel source through an electric vehicle versus gas as it is at the pumps. So, potential savings there already, but coupling this with a solar electric system just really makes a whole lot of sense, as you can probably imagine. And so to be looking at a complete all electric home, you'd be considering generating your electricity to offset that usage as well. We see a pretty large solar electric system on this roof. And as we, see more and more electricity usage by fuel switching, these systems are going to get larger and larger on average. So, we've talked about how we can use electricity. So let's talk about how we can produce it. So we're going to move into the solar electric system basics here. And I'm going to kind of break down how a solar electric system works. And then importantly, we're going to talk about net energy metering, which has been in the news a lot. Probably most people on this workshop, I would assume, are at least somewhat familiar with what net energy metering is and the direction it's going. But we're going to talk about that just to make sure that you understand what you're getting into and the importance of considering solar electric system immediately as these changes are happening. So just to kind of talk about how a grid tied system works and what the different components are, there are two main components in these solar electric systems. One would be the PV modules, the solar modules, the panels, whatever you want to call them. Generally, these are sitting up on people's roofs. And what they're doing is generating DC electricity or direct current electricity. And our goal with a grid tied system is to on an instantaneous basis, when the solar electric system is working, when it's running, when the sun is out, we're going to be generating more electricity than we're using generally at any given time during the day. And that excess electricity is going to be exported to the grid, and we'll be credited for whatever we produce beyond what we use. In order to do that, since the grid operates on AC electricity or alternating current, we need an inverter or inverters in order to complete that process. So the panels generate DC electricity. The inverter takes that DC electricity and turns it to AC electricity, and then it's exported to the grid. So you'll see here, point 1 is the panels, point 2 is the inverter, and then 3 you're onto your main service panel, where it generally would be tied into a single breaker, maybe multiple breakers. And then it's going to run through the utility owned meter and out to the grid. So at the meter level, it's capturing the net electricity, meaning, when you generate electricity, it's not capturing how much you're generating. When you're using electricity, it's not necessarily capturing how much you're using, but at any given time, it's looking at the net number to say, in the middle of the day, assume, or just use, for example, a 5 kilowatt system over the course of 1 hour of direct sunlight, that system will produce 5 kilowatt hours. If you use 2 kilowatt hours over the course of that hour, then the net is going to be 3 kilowatt hours produced. So the utility will see that and they'll credit you for 3 kilowatt hours produced. And that process is known as net energy metering. So net energy metering has been in place for the last 27 years. We've had a net energy metering program in PG&E's territory and generally throughout California. And this is the program through which they're keeping track of how much electricity you're using and how much you're producing at a net basis. So when you install a grid tied system, you will become a net energy metering program. That is how this works. You will go on to an annual billing cycle. So you're given an entire year to generate electricity and to use electricity. And at the end of 1 year, you get billed for that. You'll receive monthly statements that say, this is how much you've used and how much you've produced. This is what the net is, and this is how much you currently owe or how much you currently are owed. It'll give you an estimate as to what you might end up at the end of the year. But it's not until the end of 1 year that you pay or you are paid based on where you land for production and usage after the entire year. Currently, under net energy metering, you are credited at nearly 100% the retail rate for the kilowatt hours that you produce to offset the kilowatt hours that you use. So that's for those kilowatt hours that are exported to the grid ultimately. You will be credited at nearly the retail rate. It's actually the retail rate minus 2.2 cents per kilowatt hour. But that is quite so close that, Generally speaking, when you're sizing a solar electric system, we're looking to size out a solar electric system that produces just as much electricity as you are expected to use, and then a little bit more to provide you a bit of a buffer. When you become a net energy metering program, you have to go on to what's known as a time of use rate structure. So you'll see here, this is the current ETOUC rate structure that most net energy metering customers are on. And if you recall, there was a time maybe 2 years ago, year and a half ago, where PG&E gave everyone the option of opting in or out of time of use rate structures. They made a real push to get people onto time of use, because there are certain times of the day where the grid is reliably more taxed than other times of the day. And they're trying to mitigate that. So time of use rates can allow us to do that. An important thing to understand here is that there are times in which electricity is cheaper and times in which electricity is more expensive. Under this rate, the peak times take place between 4 and 9 p.m. every day. The off-peak times are every other hour. So as you can see here, there are summer peak and off-peak and winter peak and off-peak rates. It's very similar during the winter between off-peak and peak, but in the summer, it is a larger disparity from 42 cents per kilowatt hour to about 49 cents per kilowatt hour between off-peak and peak. Because of the fact that we are credited almost 100% the retail rate of the kilowatt hour when we net export, we basically can look at the grid as a large battery without the one main, benefit of a battery that allows us to keep using electricity when the power goes out, right? From a billing standpoint, from a dollars and cents standpoint, we've been able to treat the grid like a battery, because when we net export electricity, it effectively, it goes out onto the grid. And of course, those electrons that we generated are just kind of bouncing around, but we get credited for that electricity when we export it to the grid. And when we need to use electricity at night or in the seasons where we're usually using more than we're producing, we can draw from that bank of credits. Much the same way that if we had a battery, you generate electricity, and if there's capacity in the battery, you store that generated electricity in the battery, and then can draw from it when you need it. We've been able to do that much the same way with the grid under net energy metering. Be aware that when you generate more electricity than you produce on an annual level, you will actually get compensated for that overproduction, but it's at the wholesale rate. As a Sonoma Clean Power customer, assuming you are, you would actually get compensated at twice the wholesale rate, but that still results in about 6 to 7 cents per kilowatt hour. So the value of the solar electric system when you are overproducing on a regular basis annually, the value tends to drop. Right, whatever you're overproducing, you don't see as quick of a return on investment for that portion of the system. So for this reason, it's not advisable or very common to intentionally oversize a system. So this is the way that net energy metering is working currently, and we're on the second iteration of net energy metering. However, we're going to the third iteration, or NEM 3. Everyone freaks out. This is the thing that we're freaking out about right now. This is going to equal big changes for the way that solar electric systems work. And this kid is rightfully freaking out. So let's take a look at net energy metering 2 versus what it's popularly known as now, NEM 3, or through the utilities prescription net billing. We're switching to the term net billing for this. I'm going to keep calling it NEM 3 through this program, but understand if you see net billing written out anywhere, that's what this is referring to. So we established some stuff in terms of NEM 2. Currently, you're compensated based on the retail rate nearly the full retail rate per kilowatt hour. It's just a little bit below, about 2.2 cents per kilowatt hour. Under NEM 3, you'll be compensated based on what's known as the avoided cost calculator, which tries to capture the actual value of electricity generated by solar electric systems. It's very complicated, it's very convoluted, but ultimately what this means is that what you are compensated for every kilowatt hour that you generate will be roughly about 75% less than what you're compensated for electricity that you generate under net energy metering 2. That does not mean that the return on investment is going to be 4 times as long. We'll get back to that just a little bit later, but be aware the value of those kilowatt hours that you're compensated for, it drops pretty significantly. Under NEM 2, you do need to adopt a time of use rate structure. That does not change. However, the difference is that you have to go on to the time of use rate structure with the highest cost differential between peak and off peak, which right now, that rate structure that people would have to go on to is the difference of about, I think at the lowest level, it's about 33 cents per kilowatt hour, and off peak and in peak, it's about 52 cents per kilowatt hour. So quite a big disparity there. And that could potentially play into a heightened value of energy storage systems. And we will get back to that later too. Under NEM 2, most people are seeing about a 4 to 5 year return on investment. Under NEM 3 or net billing with a standalone solar electric system, most people will be seeing a return on investment of about 9 to 10 years. So definitely pushes out the return on investment. As I said, it doesn't quadruple it with seeing the value of the kilowatt hour compensated at dropping by 3/4 of the value, because ultimately what the utility is seeing is your net. They're seeing just whatever that generation or usage is after the generation of the kilowatt hour. So with that example that I used earlier, if a solar electric system generates 5 kilowatt hours over the course of 1 hour and you used 2, then all they're going to see, the utility, is the net of 3 kilowatt hours produced. So those 2 kilowatt hours, you offset them effectively at a 1-to-1 rate if you are producing at the same time that you're using. So that's why this results in a 9 to 10 year return on investment. Under NEM 2, energy storage doesn't really show a very reasonable financial return because of the fact that we get credited on almost the full retail rate of the kilowatt hour when we're generating electricity under NEM 2. So when you think about generating electricity and storing it in a battery, and the battery functioning much like the grid does, what the battery is storing is a kilowatt hour that you've already paid for, right? Whether you paid for it to come from the grid and go directly into that battery, or you've paid for it in the form of purchasing a solar electric system, that's the kilowatt hour that you've already paid for. So it's going to go into the battery and you're going to draw on it the same way that you would draw from the grid. When you need electricity, you can draw from it. There are some ways to use batteries that show a higher value if you charge your battery during the off-peak time and draw from that battery during the peak time. That is one way that you can see an added value to the battery. But when net energy metering is allowing us to do effectively the same thing, you put 1 kilowatt hour in net and you can basically draw 1 kilowatt hour out. It's functioning very much the same. So through net energy metering 3 or net billing, a battery does become much more reasonable. Basically, if the value that you're getting from that kilowatt hour by exporting it to the grid is greatly reduced, the value of the kilowatt hour put into the battery is largely maintained. The value stays pretty much the same. There are some inefficiencies round trip. If you put 1 kilowatt hour into the battery, you're not going to be able to draw exactly 1 kilowatt hour out. It doesn't stay at 1-to-1, but it makes it function much the same way that net energy metering functions right now. And we'll come back to that too. So some pretty big changes between NEM 2 and NEM 3 or net billing. But you do still have the ability to get in under NEM 2. NEM 3 or net billing has not gone live yet. It will actually go live on April 14th of this year. So you're sitting on about a few months, a little less than a few months, in which you can take action to secure net energy metering 3. And in order to do that, you would have to file a suite of documentation with PG&E by April 13th. And that documentation is actually largely going to be handled by a contractor. So part of that documentation is that you do actually have to enter into a contract in order to build out this system. You will see that the contractor will actually file that documentation on your behalf. That is actually one of their standard practices right now. Practically every contractor that you would enter into a turnkey agreement for a solar electric system would be filing this paperwork on your behalf anyway. Currently with this and trying to get this documentation in, I think we're going to see that contractors are really going to be filling out their pipelines. They're going to have certainly some additional traffic coming through their doors of people trying to secure their status as a net energy metering customer under NEM 2. You don't have to have the system built out. You don't have to have even started on the work by April 13th. You really just have to be in contract, and this documentation, as it's broken out here, has to be filed. You actually will have 3 years to build the system following the filing of that application in order to still qualify for NEM 2, assuming that you get your application in and it's free of major deficiencies. That caveat is a little gray for my taste. It is defined what does need to be in, but saying, is that it's free of major deficiencies does kind of leave the door open for some subjectivity on the utilities part. But what that means is, the sooner you get on this, the better likelihood you have of getting in under NEM 2, which I think I've shown is definitely in your best interest. So for NEM 2, if you do get in, you will be granted a grandfathered status for 20 years. So that means that even if the rates continue to go up, the way that you are accredited and billed will still stay the same. So as the rates go up, electricity may cost you more, but you'll also get credited for that electricity more. So, so NEM 2 and this grandfathered status really does protect you to where if you size out a system right now, as long as your usage stays roughly the same, that production should take care of your bill. Some other important caveats: if you do end up expanding on that system, that may push you over to whatever the current iteration of NEM is at that point. If you do want to add battery backup onto your system further down the road, doing that will not change your status under NEM. So that's good news. All of this is good news. You do still have the ability to get in under NEM 2, and you want to do so if you can. Now, I don't want for that to make you think that it's game over if you're interconnecting under NEM 3. Maybe you'd be a little bit indifferent. Things are not as good under NEM 3 as they are under NEM 2, but it's not all bad. The utility is still tracking your net production and consumption. So those kilowatt hours that you're producing when you're using electricity are going to be a direct offset. That's not going to be affected. The useful lifespan of these systems is, 25 plus years. So even if the return on investment for a solar electric system is pushed out to 9 to 10 years, you still have a lot of useful life in that system that's going to show some real savings beyond the time that you see that ROI of 9 to 10 years. And the utility states actually in the guidance letter, the Public Utilities Commission states in that guidance letter that was filed that the successor tariff should transition the solar market to a solar paired with storage market. And so under NEM 3, as we've discussed already, the value of a battery really grows. You can see a lot more value out of battery coupled with a solar electric system than you do under NEM 2. And beyond that, you're still doing something really great for the planet. You're still eliminating your carbon footprint. It's just coming at a little slower return on investment under NEM 3. And as we were talking about with the heat pump water heaters, you are helping to add to the stability of the grid. What the grid needs right now is storage capacity, and adding storage capacity on, whether it's at the commercial scale or at the residential scale, will be helping the grid and prolonging its life, which it sorely needs in order to stay safe and healthy. And again, you're doing something great for the planet and the kids. Think about the kids. So some commonly asked questions. We've been talking about battery backup a little bit here, but to dive into it just a little bit more, under NEM 2, battery backup, the biggest value that you see in battery backup is when you're considering how you're going to use this battery in the case of a power outage. If you're someone who is seeing more power outages because maybe you live a little bit more rurally, or you're in an area where those public safety power shutdowns are more prevalent, battery backup takes on that value in that you can use it in your home when power goes out. For those of us that live a little bit more in an urban setting, we don't lose power all that often. So under NEM 2, we don't see as much of a value. And that's because we're relying less on that ability to, again, charge a battery using solar electricity during the off-peak time and then draw from it during the peak time. That's where that value really lands. If you're under NEM 2 and you don't see a whole lot of power outages, there's maybe not as much value to it. But if you are somewhere where the power outages land, you're considering things like, what are my essential loads? What are the things that I need to power in my home in order to stay in it in the case of a power outage? And those are the things that you'd be looking at powering. One battery can take care of that, a refrigerator, a freezer, maybe some lights and outlets to make sure that you can see at night and you can keep your phone charged and keep getting information through the internet, those sorts of things. In terms of the actual setup and, technical aspect of energy storage systems coupled with solar electric systems, there are all kinds of different configurations. Every different contractor is going to show you a different configuration based on the types of, based on the manufacturers for the products that they're going to be pitching you. There are inverters that sit in different spots in the line, depending on how that electricity is coming from the panels. And batteries can be running on AC power, they can be running on DC power. So there are a lot of different configurations. And this is an important consideration if you're thinking about installing a battery down the road. Chances are pretty good that you're going to end up working with the same contractor to install a battery down the road as you work with to install your solar electric system, because they're going to get in there and they're going to have to fiddle around with the wiring. They're going to have to fiddle around with basically how that system is set up. And that could potentially void a workmanship warranty. So you probably will work with the same contractor to get that done. When we're considering solar electric systems and energy storage systems, there's a lot to consider here. You're thinking about, the money-making proposition. As I said, a lot more valuable under NEM 3 than it is under NEM 2. The battery stores kilowatt hours that you've already paid for, as I mentioned before. Main functions are, backup for power outages like we talked about. And then the other main function, especially under NEM 3, is that process that I've been talking about, charging up the battery during off-peak and drawing from it during peak. That's known as rate arbitrage. And, again, I've said this a number of times, but under the current iteration of NEM, we really are able to treat the grid like a battery. So as we get into NEM 3 or net billing, we're starting to really consider that battery backup. If you electrify your home without a battery, previously usable systems will not function during an outage. So this is an important consideration. We're talking about electrification here. You're talking about switching your, cooktop to induction. You're talking about switching your water heater to storage tank. If the power outage is a short one, probably not too concerned about it, especially from the water heating standpoint. That storage tank generally has a larger capacity. If you have like a 50-gallon storage tank water heater, in order to be more efficient, it actually makes more sense to install a larger heat pump water heater in most cases. So you probably would be looking at like potentially up to an 80-gallon heat pump water heater. And that kind of capacity can actually maintain its heat. Its thermal mass allows for it to stay hotter for longer. So if it's a short power outage, it's probably not really going to affect you. But think about it in the case of, a 1-2 day power outage. If you're doing things with electricity, you would not be able to do those things without electricity. So definitely, backup of those systems with the battery system can look a lot more attractive if you're somewhere that you're seeing regular long power outages. And to be really clear and transparent, that's usually not going to be taken care of with a single battery. You're going to be looking at multiple batteries that do come with a pretty hefty cost, and we will look at that in a minute. Another thing to consider is the fact that what's known as the well, through the utility, it's actually known as the V2X program, X being interchangeable with home or building or load or grid, whatever that may be. Cars, our electric vehicles are now, you see it with the Ford Lightning, they're being outfitted with the ability to actually backfeed your service and allow for you to draw from the car battery in the case of a power outage. PG&E is currently piloting this program through their residential rates to see how this might work. To this point, you've not been able to, with the battery storage system, you've only had the ability to draw from that battery to use that electricity in your home. You've not been allowed to export that electricity. And so there is some functionality in the V2B setup that the utility is playing with to see how they can actually allow for the export of electricity and for at the same time to allow that vehicle to have its battery utilized as power backup in your home. So this is coming online. We don't really know how it's going to look in the future, but this is a potential alternative to purchasing a battery outright and having that sit dedicated in your home. There is some functionality behind car batteries being drawn from in the home and also potentially exported electricity to the grid. Now, what about the federal tax credit? Oh, yes, everyone is stoked on the federal tax credit. For the longest time, I had a little kid freaking out whenever we talked about the tax credit, because for years and years, it was always one of those things that it's set to expire, it's going away. The tax credit is not going away. Last year, as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, it was extended for 10 years and actually put back at a level of 30%. We got a solar electric system in our home when we were in the one small little period of time when the tax credit dropped from 30% to 26%. So we got 26%, but anyone else looking at it now, you're going to get a full 30%. And do be aware that that 30% is applicable to the full contract price and can be applied to energy storage systems, battery backup systems, whether you're coupling that system with a solar electric system or not. So if you're only looking at installing a battery for whatever reason you might be looking at that, 30% is applicable to that as well. And as I said, it was extended for 10 years, so this is not going away until the mid-2030s. So that's great news. Now, I had talked about running some models for you, so I'm going to do that based on showing you kind of like average usage in a home in our area, what that translates to in terms of the cost of your bills, what that would translate to in bills going forward, what kind of system size you might expect to install in order to take care of that, and what that cost might be and what the return might show. Now, there are some, I have to apologize because I think there are some numbers in here that just assumed that net energy metering was going to be moving forward as it already was. That we know now that that's not the case. So when we come up on those numbers, I will call it out and we can talk about it just a little bit. But I am still trying to get through this so we can get to questions too. This is all assuming that you're able to get in under net energy metering too, and that you have average usage in Sonoma County. So this represents average usage, about a $200 per month bill. Obviously, it would be kind of all over the place in terms of the amount of kilowatt hours you'd use per month. But this type of usage, 575 kilowatt hours on average, would result in about a $200 per month bill, and would result in a solar electric system size of about 5 kilowatts, 5.06 to be precise in this case. So the cost on that, when we're looking at a solar electric system, we're generally looking at the cost per watt. So if the costing is coming in somewhere average, this system size would probably run somewhere between $17,700 to about $20,250 as the contract price. Federal tax credit applied to that would show an out-of-pocket of somewhere between $12,004 and $14,170. And it's important to look at this and consider the fact that our utility rates are going up. Traditionally, it's been closer to about 4 to 5% per year, but over the last 4 years, we've seen closer to like a 10% increase every year. So starting out at $200 per month right now, in 15 years, the same amount of usage would result in about $460 per month. And 30 years, you would be looking to have spent about $193,000 on electricity, assuming your usage stayed the same and we saw a 6% annual increase. So if your out of pocket is between $12,400 and $14,200, you can see what the savings may look like. Now, keep in mind that around the 20-year mark, net energy metering will likely change for you. If you're grandfathered in for 20 years, the savings, are not basically going to be like these bills are eliminated. In order to do that, that is the point at which you may really be considering installing a battery in order to take care of that production that you are now getting credited much less for. We don't know what net energy metering is going to look like in 20 years from now, if that's even going to exist. So take the more conservative view and assume you're not getting credited for those kilowatt hours that you're producing. At that point, the inclusion of a battery system to make sure that the rest of the useful lifespan of that system is really milked. I think it's going to be really obvious at that point, if all of a sudden at year 20, you're not able to take advantage of net energy metering any longer. And all you're really getting credited for is not really a credit, but instead just a direct offset of what you're producing versus what you're using instantaneously. You're going to see some pretty high bills. And looking at how you can mitigate those probably will come in the form of battery backup that you can, kind of play that rate arbitrage game. So very clear savings here. And with every, added kilowatt hour, we only see increased savings. So now we're looking at usage with the inclusion of a heat pump water heater, induction cooking, a heat pump dryer, and then that heat pump HVAC, which, we said is we can't really truly predict how much usage you're going to see. I've worked an additional 2 kilowatts in terms of system size in here to account for that heat pump HVAC system. So if that were the case, this usage would have jumped from about 575 kilowatt hours on average to now about 950 kilowatt hours on average. When we look at system size for that, we've added on about 8.5 kilowatts to this, 3.5 kilowatts to this system size. And you'll notice here that this says DC system size for a 110% offset. It's pretty standard for contractors to look at sizing a system to be 110% of your past annual usage. So do be aware of that. Like I said, I know I mentioned this earlier, but it does kind of account for a little bit of a buffer for years where you use more or produce less. And there's also an expected degradation for these systems where they're going to produce about 0.5% per year less than the previous year. That system, about 8.5 kilowatts in order to take care of the full electrification that we talked about. Now at $3.50 per watt, that's looking like about $29,250, up to, if the system comes to you at $4 per watt, about $33,430. With that 30% federal tax credit, it's looking about between $20,500 and $23,400 out of pocket if you're able to take advantage of that federal tax credit. So let's look at these bills as they're moving forward. What is today a $350 bill per month? In 5 years is $445, 10 years is about $600, and 15 years about $800. So you can see, when you're starting with a higher bill, those bills look like they increase faster. Of course, they're increasing at the same rate, but that exponential rate increase looks scarier and scarier as time goes on. Looking out 30 years, in year 30, the same usage would result in about $1,900 per month cost for electricity. Getting pretty outlandish, but who knows what the value of a dollar is going to be in 30 years. And I'm sure if we look at our utility costs 30 years ago, our bills are all significantly higher now than they were 30 years ago for roughly the same amount of usage. So looks outlandish, but not entirely out of the question. This shows that you would have a total spend of about $1/3 of $1 million on electricity alone if you fully electrified and stuck with the utilities as they are. So, you know, $333,250 as your spend for electricity over 30 years versus the outset of $20,500 to $23,400 to generate that same amount of electricity. Same deal applies year 20, you lose net energy metering too and have to look at potential storage, but the value is quite obviously there. Last consideration is the addition of an electric vehicle. So electric vehicles use a lot of electricity, but keep in mind, you are eliminating your need to go to a gas station and you have the ability to effectively prepay for that fuel for 25, 30, 35 years, depending on the lifespan of the system. So now we're looking at average usage of about 1,285 kilowatt hours per month, 15,400 kilowatt hours per year. That results in a $495 per month bill, roughly. System size to offset that, now we've jumped from 8.5 kilowatts to 11.5 kilowatts, adds on about 3 kilowatts for a single EV. And I think my assumption on this was probably driving somewhere between like 10 and 12,000 miles per year, just so you're aware. Now system cost, of course, as I mentioned before, we're breaking this down in terms of cost per watt. So we would expect to still be looking at the cost per watt for the system. 11.3 kilowatts is 11,300 watts. Kilo means 1,000. So if we break this down in terms of cost per watt, at $350 per watt, which is kind of the average in our area, $39,500 as the contract price versus $4 per watt being $45,200. That results in an out-of-pocket after that federal tax credit of $27,700 to $31,600. And if we're looking at utility costs, if it blew you away before in terms of how much it's going to go up when you're starting with a high bill anyway, then buckle up, because what we've got here is about $500 per month right now. After 15 years, we're looking at about $1,100 per month for the same usage. Going all the way up to year 30, where you see about $2,670 for the same level of usage. Now, in case I didn't make this clear before, these numbers are assuming your usage stays the same and you didn't adopt a solar electric system, right? Or some sort of renewable energy system to generate that electricity yourself. So after 30 years of usage without offsetting that usage somehow, and 6% annual rate increases, you're looking at about, a little shy of $500,000 spent on electricity. There's that little kid that used to freak out about the tax credit. So you can compare that to a total spend for a solar electric system between $27,700 and $31,600. So again, obvious potential for savings. You'd still have to consider the same thing at year 20 or year 21 rather, when NEM goes away. But clear savings between now and then a path to deeper savings with the inclusion of energy storage. So just to kind of wrap up what that looks like, for this average system, 5 kilowatt system cost between $12,000 to $14,000. If we go fully electrified and add on an electric vehicle, you're looking at, closer to $27,700 to $31,600 out of pocket. And again, under net energy metering 2, which all of this we were assuming net energy metering 2, you should see somewhere around 4 to 5 year return on investment if you're purchasing outright. Huge bonus to this beyond, the bonus to this is obviously that the cost of natural gas has been eliminated, right? You have, this would be your only utility cost. And if you effectively prepay by purchasing that system and generating your own electricity, you are effectively eliminating your utility bill. Bonus is that your carbon footprint has also been eliminated. If you're driving a clean energy vehicle, generating that electricity yourself, and all of the fuel that you're using in your home is generated by you, you no longer have that carbon footprint in your home and transportation. And the biggest bonus is that you'll never have to go to a gas station again. Yes. That's a great bonus. So the addition of batteries, as I mentioned, we talked about this, the cost of a single battery is pretty expensive. You're looking at between $10,000 to $15,000. So it's no small cost. And fully electrified homes would almost assuredly require more than a single battery. So under net energy metering too, as I stated, for a solar electric system, your return on investment is 4 to 5 years. With the inclusion of a single battery, it actually only pushes that overall return on investment out to 6 or 7 years, which is still pretty palatable for most. If you're under NEM 3, including a battery in that system will actually bring your return on investment down. You go from 9 to 10 year return on investment for a standalone solar electric system, down to about a 7 to 8 year return on investment with the inclusion of a battery, because you're able to take advantage of that rate arbitrage, which is really going to be valuable. The utility is pushing people towards this solution, and they're showing value in it too. Unfortunate portion of batteries is that most of them have about a 10-year warranty. So they don't really last as long as your solar electric system is expected to last. Just be aware of that. And also be aware that, safety and energy security, as I say here, is a totally viable reason to invest in batteries. Energy independence is important to a lot of people. Knowing that you're going to have power, even if power goes out, may be really important to you, especially if you're someone who absolutely needs power. If you're affected by power outages in a more real way, in a way that affects, medical equipment or something along those lines, this can be a real peace of mind, knowing that you're going to continue to have electricity in the case of a power outage. These are all the most important points that I could throw together in a as brief a presentation as I could make. This is obviously a huge topic: electrification plus production plus storage. It's a big topic, and we could talk about it all day, but I hope that I've summarized it pretty well for you here. I do want to mention that we do have a financing program in-house, as I mentioned earlier, that can finance practically all of these improvements that we talked about over the course of this time, aside from the heat pump, clothing dryer. Everything else we could potentially finance for you. So let us know if you're interested in that. Also, as I mentioned in financing, I should say that Sonoma Clean Power has a 0% on-bill financing product for not for renewable energy or storage, but if you are considering any of the heat pump type improvements, up to $10,000 for up to a 10-year term at 0% financing is about the most attractive financing that you will ever find, 0%. So do take advantage of that if you're interested in that. Beyond that, we also offer consultations considering fuel switching, considering energy efficiency, and considering solar electric systems. If you are interested, as I mentioned at the beginning of this program, in exploring this for yourself and your own solutions, do reach out. We offer these at no charge. This is really just a program that we offer to our community to help people get more efficient and lessen their carbon footprint. So there's a link there for the financing. You can see sonomacountyenergy.org/financing for the consultation program, sonomacountyenergy.org/better-buildings. And we will send these slides out. And that is the end of my program. I do think we went a little bit over time, and I apologize because it's just so much to cover. But I don't have anything else on my calendar until 1 o'clock. So Danielle, if you don't mind, and if you still have the time, it'd be great to get to some of these questions as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really glad that you mentioned, though, the consultations, because there are a lot of specific questions that I think might be more well suited in maybe a one-on-one kind of consult. But we'll go through especially the broad questions.
Okay.
First of all, a shout out to the first comment, who is the prime example of electrification. They said that they electrified their entire house with the mini splits, induction, heat pump, water heater, solar, everything. So that's really exciting to see. And we're able to take advantage of the Bay Ren incentives and
Wonderful.
rebate. So that
Awesome.
was good to see, right?
So great. And I hope that the sentiment is that it's performing the way you expect it to and want it to. That's awesome. We love to see that. So thank you.
That was good to see. The second question was about scheduling the solar consultation. They wanted to know if it was like a site visit, I did explain in the chat that we don't actually go out to the homes, that the site visits are held in-house, either here in our office or via a Zoom type of meeting. But they're also curious about time frame on how soon to expect one of those potentially.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, definitely, I've been doing about, I try to limit myself to 2 per day, but I've been doing about 3 per day. So we're probably out, it's hard to say. Probably we'd be looking at next week at the earliest. And I can't say because I can't pull up my calendar without unsharing my stuff here. So I would say, expect that probably sometime late next week is about the earliest that we have available, but do call into our front desk here and one of us will help you out in getting that scheduled. I've put up our contact information. So feel free to reach out to this email address or the phone number and we'll do what we can to get that scheduled as soon as possible.
Okay, the next question had to do with a discrepancy basically about how the math worked out for one person's kilowatt hour, basically the payment from the utility. How much should it be technically, like per kilowatt hour?
In terms of, well, it's going to depend on what your rate structure is. We all are able to switch our rate structure through there are a number of different rate structures available to us as residential customers. So right now, depending on the rate structure that you're on, that can vary anywhere between, at the lowest end, the kilowatt hour is costing us about 30 cents per kilowatt hour, and at the highest end, it's costing about 52 cents per kilowatt hour. And that's really dependent on the rate structure that you're on. So what I can say is that if the question is, how much are you actually being compensated for the electricity? Like I said earlier, it's that the value of that kilowatt hour based on your rate structure minus 2.2 cents per kilowatt hour. And that was a change that took place from when we went from net energy metering 1 to net energy metering 2. Under NEM 1, you were just compensated the full retail rate of the kilowatt hour. Whatever your rate structure was, when you generate a kilowatt hour, you're credited the exact same as you would have paid for it. Under NEM 2, they actually took 2.2 cents per kilowatt hour and applied it to public goods charges. So it actually goes back to programs that are benefiting the community, such as some of these rebates that are available. Public good charges, by and large, are responsible for the rebates that we're able to take advantage of, along with lots of different programs like, contractor training, lots of community benefits. So I hope that answers the question. It depends on the rate structure that you're on, which you can find on your bill. It should say what your rate structure is and what your cost is per kilowatt hour as well.
Awesome. Okay. The next one is a clarification question. There was a slide that was talking about a NEM status going live on April 14th. Was that for NEM 3 or was that for NEM 2?
That is for NEM 3. So we are currently in NEM 2. And just to reiterate from that slide, what it stated is that NEM 3 goes live on April 14th. So in order to be granted status under NEM 2, you have to have your interconnection agreement and packet filed by, I think it's actually close of business on April 13th. So like 5 p.m. on April 13th is your cutoff to get in under NEM 2.
Awesome. And that kind of went into the next question also. Somebody was talking about if they have a solar array system that's modified, whenever, one of the new NEM 3 say took place, does some of the array stay classified under NEM 2 and then the rest of it go to NEM 3, or how does that work?
Unfortunately not. No, it's based on the entire system. And so say, for example, you have a 5 kilowatt system. So I have to apologize because I put a link into the advice letter that was codified by the Public Utilities Commission. There is a link in the slides as you'll receive it. It's a 260-page document. It's really massive. And I was kind of combing through it earlier to find some of the finer points. And I was trying to find what the that limitation is or what the threshold is. I know that under NEM 1 to NEM 2, if you were in under NEM 1 and you added more than 1 kilowatt to your system, then you would be pushed over to NEM 2. And I believe it's roughly the same. You'll be able to add a little bit of power onto your existing under NEM 2, but not be pushed over to NEM 3. But like 1 kilowatt would likely push you into NEM 3. I don't know what the exact number is, and I apologize. I will continue to look for that. And so for anyone who is interested in moving forward, you can ask that question of a contractor, or if it's really making a difference to you, give us a call. I should have that figured out pretty shortly.
Okay. Moving on, the question is, can the IRA extended tax credit be utilized over several tax years, or does it have to be taken in the year of install?
It can be spread out over multiple years, and you don't even have to take advantage of it in the first year. So yes, can be spread out.
Awesome. And then next, it kind of is along that same line as well, talking about the tax credit. If someone is having their roof done at the same time as solar, are they eligible for the tax credit on the entire project cost?
Great question. And I am not a tax preparer. We're not CPAs. That is the type of advice that we cannot give. I would say talk with your tax preparer. The tax code on the renewable energy system credit is quite gray and up to interpretation. So work with your tax preparer on that one.
Okay.
That would be my only word.
Okay. I was thinking kind of the same thing. For Bob, he asks, do you know if the car and a vehicle to home power system will have to be some type of specialized EV, or would any EV work?
It definitely is not just like blanket any EV. The EV that you use is going to have that functionality included. But we are seeing, major manufacturers start to include that functionality just as a standard feature. Like I said, with the Ford Lightning, I think that is a function that it comes preloaded, but none of the Teslas actually come preloaded. So it's like it's a technology that we're making our way into, and not every vehicle can do that. But as time goes on, we're going to see more and more vehicles having that capability.
Great. We have 2 more left, so we're at the end here. Question about how the tax credit works, kind of shifting back to that, asking if the tax credit is issued to the person who's getting the work done for them, or if it's calculated when the installer is basically, kind of making their estimates.
Well, the tax credit is going to be based directly on the project cost. So now I am getting a little bit into the tax code as it's written, but it basically states that that the renewable energy system and supporting systems are eligible for the tax credit. So for example, if you end up having to upgrade your main service panel, but the contractor that you're working with is not doing that for you, instead you're using a separate contractor, an electrician, and you have a contract with your solar contractor and a contract with your electrician, all of those costs are eligible for the federal tax credit. But what you are able to take is ultimately based on whatever that contract price was and what you paid out. I think that probably answers the question, and it's to you as the owner of the system.
I think that's kind of what they were getting at, whether it was to you as the owner of the system, or if it's kind of bundled in with the contractor.
Oh, yeah, it's a great question, because I will say that we get to look at a lot of bids and estimates and contracts coming through, and contractors do like to detail that federal tax credit and show you what your bottom line is. And it's not always super clear. This contract price is what's going to be due to the contractor. If the contract is 17,000 and change, and they're showing you, and you're going to get a 5,000 something tax credit, they show you, look, out of pocket is $12,000. But they're going to be due that contract price, because you are the one that's going to take advantage of that federal tax credit when tax time comes. So yes, you own it. The contractor does not own it. They're not filing anything on your behalf. That part you do have to take care of yourself.
Perfect. And then finally, the last question is, do these ROI calculations generally apply to Healdsburg as well as PG&E?
That is a great question. And I have not taken a look at Healdsburg's utility rates recently. Off the top of my head, I would say probably not. Healdsburg electricity is much cheaper by and large than PG&E and Sonoma Clean Power. So I don't think that the actual ROI would play out the same way. I don't think that you would see an ROI that's, like a whole lot worse, but it wouldn't be in the 4 to 5 year range. It would probably be closer to the, 7+ ish range, but I couldn't know without really running those numbers. So to that person, whoever that is, give us a call, and I have a calculator that I can plug those rates into, and we can look at it together, and I can help you out to understand what you're looking at.
Perfect. And that concludes the questions.
That's great. Awesome. Well, thank you, Danielle, for moderating. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone who attended. And that is our program. Definitely, wherever you heard about this program, please stay tuned in, because we have a number of other workshops that are coming up. I know a lot of people have been registering for our space conditioning workshop, I think, is coming up next, and primarily on heat pumps. So do take a look at our website. It's here, sonomacounty.ca.gov/energy, and you'll find a listing of our workshops. And really appreciate everyone coming out. Thanks so much.